I want to welcome everyone to your Smart Manager webinar brought to you by Ulinds. I'm your host, Matt Pambid, and today we're talking about difficult conversations, planning for success. And we need to talk about this because difficult conversations keep us up at night. It gives us a knot in our stomach, but I've got some good news for you. We have a resident expert with us, Leslie Fiorenzo. Welcome, Leslie.
Thanks, Matt. Really excited to be here this afternoon.
Not only is Leslie a fellow account director here at Ulinds, but she's also literally wrote the book on difficult conversations. She is the author of 21 Lessons for Mastering the Difficult Conversation, which is available on Amazon.com. Well, that's just miraculous that you even pulled that off. Congratulations. Now, I know a few people have their hands raised. We will get to you. And I just want to remind everyone that people have had their cameras turned off and the chat function is closed so that everyone will please use the Q&A because we do want to hear from you. We have a couple of questions and we'd like to hear any feedback, questions you may have as we go along. And if you stick around afterwards, we will join you in the Life Advisor Lounge where we can continue the conversation or talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. But for now, we're talking about difficult conversations. And yeah, like I was saying, Leslie, keeps you up at night. It's something that you kind of want to avoid sometimes, but you're here to help us figure out how to do this.
Yeah, that's my goal, Matt.
All right.
I always am curious to know what people think about when they hear this idea of difficult conversations. So if we were to play a word association game and I said difficult conversations, if people would use the question and answer box to type in their word or phrase or image that immediately comes to mind.
And, you know, I will share with you while these ideas come in. One of the first one that comes to mind for me is like avoidance, but I've learned over the years that doesn't help. But we've got the audience coming in with some great ideas. Someone is suggesting the thing that they think about when they think of difficult conversations is discipline.
Yeah.
Another one is thinking personal hygiene. That is a difficult conversation. Awkward.
Sure.
Performance improvement, living will.
Oh, yeah.
Discipline again, anxiety, frowny face, procrastination, uncomfortable. Are you starting to hear a theme develop
there's
here?
Definitely a theme. Yep.
Upset employees, race and politics. Yeah, problem employee.
Bad news. Run. I like that, run. Yeah. So a couple of other ones about conflict and body odor. Interesting. Keeping cool. We're going to talk about that. So, you know, in our conversation today, Matt, what I really hope to accomplish is give people a framework that they can construct their conversation around. I do not want to tell people that by the end of this, they're going to love them. That probably not going to happen, no matter how well prepared we are or what we've done to make it a little bit easier. But I do believe they'll leave with a plan. And that's really my goal, is to help people to do that. But before we get there, let's talk about why you want to do this, why it's important. Because maybe sometimes it doesn't have to happen. Maybe there's just some conversations that, you know, it's not worth the time and energy and effort. But if it's around things like, well, somebody mentioned specifically living will, that's probably a conversation with your parents. That's an important conversation. It's about productivity. It's about profit and profitability. It's about customer service and serving our customer, making sure our organization is viable. Those are all important whys and worthwhile conversations to have. So in order to do that, we have to remember what our old friend Ben Franklin advised us. And that's, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. I don't think we don't plan to fail necessarily, but going into this conversation, just winging it. I've heard a lot of people, I just wing it. Like, yeah, you want to have a plan. So to that end, what I've created or get people to think about is in terms of a framework is this idea of because. When we think about because, the B stands for behavior. It's about behavior and then the effect that behavior is having and what has to be different in the future. That's about change. We're going to allow time for feedback. We're going to listen. I would encourage you to think about this as the place to become curious about what's happening with the other person. That curiosity then can allow us to understand and to begin to step into their shoes, see it from their perspective, so that we can come to a solution and we can then express our faith that we've solved this issue and we're going to move things forward. So I want to take a little bit of time, Matt, and talk about each one of these in turn. So let's start with behavior, because behavior is what you can see and what you can hear. So let's make up a story. You're on a team with some folks and you're working on a project, and one of the people is pretty notorious so far for showing up late to meetings and not turning in their completed assignments. So as you can see, somebody's over in the corner saying, "Oh, I'm on time, right? It's not me." But when we want to have this conversation with someone, think about focusing on what you see and what you hear. That's observable behavior. Now, Matt, we have a tool for that, don't we?
Yeah, I was going to say, don't forget, you have the EAP available to you, including management services as a member of HR and leadership. And call your account manager, because we do have a behavioral checklist that helps put everyday behaviors into terms that are behavioral. So instead of saying, they were creeping me out, you could instead write or say that they invaded my personal space and they didn't break off eye contact. Something more concrete, more descriptive, more helpful.
Because all too often we use judgment words like creeping me out. That's kind of a judgment about their behavior. Another example, and I don't know if this has ever happened to anyone in the audience, but maybe you're discussing some things with a group and somebody turns to you and says, "You know what your problem is? You're rude." Oh, wow. Okay. That just made my defenses go up. But if that person would have put it this way, if they would have turned to you and said, "The last couple times I've wanted to make a point, I felt like you jumped in and cut me off." Right? Jumping in and cutting somebody off. I mean, those are behaviors, those are observable behaviors that someone saw. The
And
other thing,
I was going to say, I'd make a smart guess that anytime you start off a sentence with, "You know what your problem is," the other person is just going to shut right down.
yeah, well, my problem is you, right? I don't have a
Yeah.
problem. The other thing we're good at as humans is making up stories, telling ourselves assumptions, assuming they're doing it because, assuming they're doing it to be mean because my feelings were hurt. But assuming they're coming from a particular place because they are whatever they are. And that might be generational. I mean, we can talk about all the different generations that are in the workplace. We can talk about the different political parties people belong to. We can talk about the different genders or different races, or even what side of town they live on. Right? It can be anything. So we want to avoid assumptions. I don't know what's in that person's head. I'm not there.
Right.
I'm not a mind reader, and mind reading is not yet a thing. Who knows if it ever will be, but avoid judgments and assumptions. And then that can lead you to setting up the conversation for success by developing your opening line. So you can see there's a question crossed out there. I would say avoid starting with a question. Start with a statement about why you want to talk to the person, why they're important to you, why this conversation is important, and then the behavior, what you're seeing or doing. So I'll go back to the story about the team who's struggling with one person who's not timely in their assignments. So, I want to talk to you today because this work that we're doing is really important for the customer service piece of our business. And when you are tardy with your assignments, it causes all kinds of problems, right? That's the E, that's the effect. Well, all kinds of problems is very general. But I want to talk to you today because when you don't complete your assignments, it puts the project behind. We have an important deadline to meet. And if we risk failing to meet this deadline, we're jeopardizing our customer. So what effect does that have on the team, on the company, on the project, whatever? So as you can see there, this company is not shipping anything. There's no trucks in there delivering or picking up materials. That's definitely going to have an effect on their business and not a positive one.
You know, this reminds me of too, also, when we talk about trying to keep employees engaged, how helpful it is to help them understand their place in the company and their role. In fact, you and I have talked about this in a different webinar, like somebody who's working on the line and they manufacture just a little widget, how that widget plays into the bigger part of it. And in this situation, you're letting them know how their behaviors are having an effect on everyone, on the company, on the morale, maybe.
Yeah, it's bigger than just that person. Their behavior has an impact on the team, the organization, the relationship, whatever it is, but think about the effect. And then the next piece of this is about change. What has to change? So as you can see in the slide, the changing of the road, the resurfacing of the road is an important change. I mean, I feel like we all want a smooth ride. And so in terms of difficult conversations, we want it to go as smoothly as possible, but it will not benefit us from trying to force agreement on what's happened in the past. Let's think about next time. So, next time we've got to be timely. Next time we've got to be early. Next time it's got to be correct. Next time we have to have somebody proof it. Whatever it is going forward, we're going to talk about the change. So now that we've kind of set the stage, it's an opportunity for us as the initiator of the conversation to be quiet and listen and allow them time to respond. The challenge I think sometimes we have with frameworks is we think it's a monologue, right? This is a conversation. So if I step back and allow them time to think about what I've said and then begin the conversation from their end.
Yeah, the other thing that occurs to me, why this is such a good idea that you came up with to allow that space. You have been percolating on this. You've been maybe rehearsing and practicing and thinking about it. So you've been sitting with this for a while. For them, where you just delivered it, this is brand new, and it may be very challenging to them, challenging their values or their perception, and that can be very unsettling. So the idea that you give them that emotional space, maybe even physical space to process this. People are slow processors. I'm one of those. Everyone
is different. So the other thing an A could stand for is appreciation, appreciating what the other person's bringing to the table and appreciating their difference. So as we allow space for them to respond, then it's about that curiosity piece. It's about understanding. So in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, this book has been around for a while. Maybe you've read it, maybe you haven't. I highly recommend it. But he talks about habit 5, seek first to understand, then be understood. And in his book, he does a beautiful job, I believe, of creating 2 situations. Father and son is the example, and one conversation where dad does not make any effort at all to understand the perspective. The conversation ends up with the son getting angry and walking out of the room. The other one where dad does make an effort and comes at it from a totally different perspective and really seeking to understand what his son is feeling and thinking, totally different outcome. I feel it's worth a read. Google it if you want to. I think there's a couple of scripts out there, but not only did Covey talk about understanding, but people who have written about this subject since. So David Stone and his colleagues at Harvard say people almost never change without feeling understood. So coming from a place of curiosity and really being willing to understand someone will go a long way towards finding a mutually agreeable solution. So I think I said when we talked about change, it will not benefit us to try to force agreement on what happens in the past. When we think about solutions, we want to be goal-oriented and future-focused. And maybe, as you see this young woman has done, put it up on a board, put it up for everybody to see what we've agreed upon, how we're going to make this work, what could sidetrack us, what could get us in our way. Having those conversations at that moment can be really helpful, because then we can wrap it up with the E, and that is expressing faith in our ability that we've got this conquered, we found an agreeable solution, or we're going to give it a try. We're going to move forward into this new future together.
I like that. That is a nice framework. By the way, I had a quick tip.
Yeah.
If you are interested in the 7 Habits of Effective People, another thing that you could maybe do is check it out from your library. They have apps you can download where you don't even have to physically go to the library, and you can check out an audiobook if you're not a reader, and you can listen to it. You know who taught me that was Stephanie Moore. I do that all the time now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
Um,
Audible, or there's many apps, but that's the one I use.
Yeah. Well, what I like about the library is that it's free. So,
Yes,
right.
it is. It is.
Because behavior, effect, we want to talk about the change, allow them that space, be curious. That's always good advice, isn't it? To be curious, so that we can reach an understanding, some solutions, and then express a confidence that we can do it. We have this. But we also know once in a while, we're going to meet that person who has the ability to be a real challenge, rattle our cage, knock us off our stride.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say about that?
Well, one of the things that when we think about this idea of maintaining our composure, I think that's really what you're talking about. As we think about these difficult conversations, that opportunity to practice. And you mentioned the account management team as a way to help people practice. Maybe simply using the methodology and writing out your opening line and a few other key points and saying them out loud, like having it roll off your tongue a few times. How does that sound? Maybe you get the perspective of a best friend. They could offer some help, or maybe your manager could offer some help.
You just made a good point too. I mean, these difficult conversations don't always happen in the office. Sometimes they're at home. Sometimes they're across the neighbor's fence. And
Yes.
yeah, we want to think wholly about that.
So then as we think about maintaining our composure, the other idea is anticipating what might go wrong and what problems we could have. Maybe the other person loses their temper. Maybe they begin to act in a way that's not you're concerned about. So anticipating that, maybe thinking about, do I need to call a break? Those kinds of things. But the other idea is about breathing. And the one, I think, key point about focusing on your breath is no one has to know you're doing it. It can help lower your blood pressure. Matt, I think there's been some studies about this that you're aware of.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, because when you take that deep breathing, you're expanding your lungs, you're forcing your rib cage to physically move, you're getting more oxygen into your blood. So it just doesn't also feel good. You are physically doing things to help lower your blood pressure, lower your heart rate. There's a science behind it.
Yeah. And then the other thing we want to remember is to keep things in perspective, keep the conversation in perspective. And so we're talking about one issue. And I encourage people to think about one issue at a time. If there's been a lot going on, maybe there are several items we have to discuss, but let's just keep it focused on this one idea, keep it in perspective. It's not necessarily the end of the world. We have a tendency sometimes to catastrophize. I think that's a word, make things worse than they are.
That's me.
Oh, you're saying,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
I ain't proud of it, but
Yeah, that happens. Well, the other thing to think about is visualize this going well. Visualize success. And so you've got that thinking about your happy place as well, and that little dog. So we think about going to some place that I feel good about, I feel comfortable in, that can help keep me focused in the moment. Matt, you want to talk about the science behind that for just a second? Because I think there is some.
well, yeah, you're talking about visualizing. And again, it's not just a feel-good thing. When you can really draw in your mind's eye a detailed picture of your happy place, like they say, your brain will have a difficulty differentiating between reality and what you're doing in your brain. And so let's say your happy place is going to the lake. And once you're in the lake, your heart rate goes down and your breathing becomes slower and your blood pressure goes down. You can have the same effect. You don't have to actually go to the lake. You can go to your happy place, and there's a science behind it. Your brain can't tell the difference. If you can visualize that well enough, your brain, it will carry along with it all of those other things that used to happen all the times that you've been to the lake. So work with science. It's on your side.
Exactly. So the other thing to think about is it's not ever, or almost always never, about getting the facts right. It's about a conflicting perception, interpretations, and values. And again, this idea is from our friend Douglas Stone and his colleagues at Harvard, who looked at difficult conversations, and their book is great too. I'm not going to be able to come up with a title, I don't have it in front of me, but let's talk about this idea of perceptions, interpretations, and values, because I think this is really where people struggle and where the conflict often comes in. So imagine you walk into the break room at your company and you see this. So what are you thinking about that 3/4 donut in the middle there? Do you think, oh, somebody didn't want the whole thing? It was really nice of them to just take a little bit and leave it, right? I only want a little bit. So maybe that gives me permission to kind of cut another piece off and leave part of the donut. Or do you think, oh my gosh, how rude. Why wouldn't they just take the whole thing and leave something that looks half eaten there? That's just so disgusting and so gross. Or Matt, you had a third perspective, I think, when we were talking about this earlier.
Well, somebody is writing in and said, at least they used a knife. And if I didn't see it, I don't know where that knife has been. I don't know what they used that for prior to. And yeah, my other thought was, if there's a box of donuts, I want to enjoy my donut and live my best life. I don't need to be donut shamed. I don't need to have that guilt and shame that someone just had a quarter of the donut. Looks like halvesies to me. Somebody else is saying, take what you're going to eat so it is not wasted. Now, wow, as much as I don't like this idea, I do like the idea of not wasting food. But you know what? Take it home to the kids then. Don't mangle. All right, that's my own. I can't. I got to get off.
But again, it's all about perceptions, and what happens to us is we feel like our perception is correct, or we're accurate, or we're right. I often ask an audience, especially if we're in person, for people to raise their hands. Who's like married to their rightness? I like to be right. Anybody else like to be right? Yeah, of course we do. So that's the challenge that we have. 2 participants raise their okay.
Somebody is saying,
people are saying,
well, somebody else is commenting that they would think that someone is on a diet.
okay.
And somebody else is saying that it's nice to leave extras for others so others can enjoy. Perception equals reality.
Yeah.
Wow, this
Yeah.
has got a lot of feelings coming out. Take the stale donut home to the kids. Mine would laugh me out of their house. Oh, okay. All right. My bad. Someone says it depends on the office. My last office would be totally cool with that. The one I'm in now, probably not. Oh, that's good advice too. You got to read your room. And then
Yeah, read
finally
your
says,
culture.
I would need to leave that half or I would eat the whole thing.
Yeah.
And one last one says, I generally see that someone leaving half an eaten donut and getting annoyed. That's, yeah. So
Yeah.
this is a perfect example of how different perceptions in something so silly as a half a donut can really generate a lot of feeling and feedback. Thank
Yeah.
you for that, audience, making this kind of interactive here. Love that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to think about when we talked at the very beginning about the idea of why, I would say a conversation about a donut is not something that's important to have. Like, why bother? But if we're making these donuts to sell, yeah, then that's a different story, right? So let's talk about the next idea that Stone and his friends talked about, and this is how we interpret things. So if I want to make sure I get my point across, or I'm pretty passionate about something, or I really want to make sure people see this, maybe using all caps is a way I do that. Now, since the advent, I think, of email, really people learned that, all caps can be perceived as you're yelling at me, or you're angry, or you're upset. So I really don't want to type in all caps. But sometimes I feel like I want to get my point across, so I might bold something or underline. How I'm interpreting things. Now, Matt, you were also going to talk about, or you had brought this to my attention about punctuation.
Oh, yeah. So I just learned this not that long ago. The younger generation, they say if like you put a period after your text, then that's like hostile or aggressive. To them, it's like saying, I am done with this conversation, period. When, I'm just like putting a period at the end of a sentence. So gotta go with the changes.
Yeah. Well, we have to be flexible. But again, is my interpretation of what's happening accurate? Maybe yes, maybe no, and maybe somebody else has a different interpretation. Then that leads us to the last point that they make, and that is about conflict of values. And so what's important to me, or how do we value two things at the same time? So speed and accuracy are often conflicting values. And so is it how quickly we work? If I want to get out of here, I want to get the job done, I want to hurry. Or if I'm in a hurry, does that cause more errors? And, if I want to get out of here at the end of the day, double checking, triple checking accuracy is more important. Now, I would maintain that probably both are important. We want to get our work done as quickly as we can, but as accurately as we can. But that's could be a point of contention and a place to look and discuss in the difficult conversation.
Now, I love this. You came up with a smart manager challenge, which is when thinking about your next difficult conversation, write down multiple perceptions, interpretations, and values. What I like about that is like you just laid out all this great information for us. Now you're challenging us to actually put it into practice. I love that. Tell me, how come you think this is a good idea, though? What is this going to do for us to write these things out?
Well, again, it's about, I think, planning and being thoughtful about your conversation. And the other thing that I would say we have for the audience as a follow-up is a document that we can send along that has some of these ideas in there, the because idea and some ways to open the conversation. Whatever people decide to do, my most important idea, I believe, is about planning. Make this conversation thoughtful and come in prepared, think it through. Whether or not you write it down, at the very least, practice saying things a few times, see how they sound, and let Uliance know how we can help, because that's what we're here for.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you have these management services available to you. Just give your account manager a phone call. Leslie, I want to thank you so much for participating and sharing your ideas with us. This has been very helpful.
My pleasure, Matt. Thanks for the invitation.